Broadcasting from the basement of La Penta, it's WICR.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sports Vault Jersey. Joe Archino back here, and the NBA playoffs are back in full swing. Really one of my favorite times of the year. I've done so many NBA segments this year, and I think you've heard me say from really day one, we're getting a rematch of last year's finals, Warriors against the Cavaliers, and I still feel that way. Cleveland certainly has not had the picture-perfect season like Golden State has, where they just built off of success and did it emphatically. Cleveland has not had the steady course this season. It has been really a season defined by some instability, a little bit of controversy, and those typically aren't good things, but when you get to this point, which is the one they've been fighting for all along, I think you're going to start to see this is the team who they were last year. And last year, really, it was the easiest path LeBron has ever had to the NBA Finals. And that's remarkable when you consider that Kevin Love was basically unavailable the entire playoffs, and Kyrie Irving was incredibly limited during that run. Let's just go back for a minute and look at Cleveland's path last season. They sweep last season, of course. LeBron, I think before we get into that when he swept the Celtics last season, LeBron has swept his first-round opponents his last 3 consecutive seasons in the NBA, and I think that happens again against the Pistons. The Pistons are a much better team. They've got some interesting players, but I think it's going to be a 4th consecutive season of a sweep by a LeBron-led team. And then we look at his next round against the Bulls. Now, that series looked a little bit closer than it was, but when you think about it, it really was not that close. You didn't have Kevin Love in that series. Kyrie Irving was extremely limited, barely played at all, and they really even punched their way through the Bulls. Then the Cavs played the Atlanta Hawks, who were the number 1 seeded team in the Eastern Conference last season, and they sweep them without Kyrie Irving. That road right there was the easiest path LeBron has ever faced to get to the finals. Because even in those years with Miami, remember, they always got stuck up on somebody. Indiana was always that team in their way, and it was such a difficult time for Miami to get past them. But they always did usually overcome it, and now we look at it, and there really isn't that threat in the Eastern Conference to them. There are good teams. There's nobody at Cleveland's level, and although Cleveland has not been perfect, I just don't think anyone is going to give them a good enough run or threaten them enough. Now we'll look at it. The Eastern Conference, you have Cleveland playing Detroit. I told you LeBron's teams have swept their first-round opponents their last 3 consecutive seasons. I think they do it once again against the Pistons. Then you've got Atlanta and Boston, which is a very interesting series. Brad Stevens is one of the hottest commodities in the NBA. People love what he does with that team. It's a very interesting young team, and they play better than what the talent on their team is just because of how good of a coach Brad Stevens is. They're so smart, but in the NBA, when you get to this point, you are exposed for who you really are. And although Brad Stevens is a great head coach, his talent on that team is not at the same level of the Atlanta Hawks. I have Atlanta moving on and playing Cleveland. And again, Boston's a great team. They play so smart. They've got some players, but just not enough players to make a substantial impact against the Atlanta Hawks. Then you've got Miami and Charlotte has been one of the best second-half teams in the league. People love what Charlotte does. I'm a big fan of them as well. I really think that team is great. And Steve Clifford, it really is one of those things where he's just a great basketball coach. He's got a great guard. He's got very smart guards, and that's a very dangerous factor to have here. Miami is one of those teams where, again, you've got to love the presence of a guy like Wade where he's not having to do as much. They've got some young, great commodities like Justice Winslow, but without the threat of Chris Bosh, the game is much different. And I think this is a competitive one, but I got to go with Charlotte here because I really think they finished out the second half of the season better than what they're ranked as the 6th seed. They've had a great second half. They're very good defensively. They've got strong guard play. And without the threat of Chris Bosh, I think Charlotte is a very, very dangerous team to face right now. I've got to go with them here. Then Toronto and Indiana is a very interesting one. people really like Toronto. I'm not as big a fan. Again, the problem with the Eastern Conference is no one has the superstars that Cleveland does. They all have good players. Toronto has some really nice players. They all have good players, but I wouldn't put any of them in the same stratosphere as I would with a Kyrie Irving or with a LeBron James, of course. Those are the real stars in this conference. The rest just have good players to pretty good players. All stars at some level, but not superstars. And superstars are what wins in the NBA playoffs, and none of the other teams have them. But in this one, I am going to go with Toronto, although I think it's much more competitive than it would look for a 7-2 series. So then Charlotte playing against Toronto and Atlanta playing against Cleveland. You already know that I have Cleveland back in the finals. I just don't, again, I think it's easy. I don't think anyone in the East challenges them enough or has the same level of talent that they do. When Cleveland locks it in and they're able to bring their best defense to the table, there's no one who can legitimately challenge them in the Eastern Conference. So I have Cleveland moving on against Atlanta. And then Charlotte and Toronto is a really interesting one. Again, I'm not in love with Toronto. I don't think that they have definable stars. They have very good players like Kyle Lowry, DeRozan, but I wouldn't elevate any of them to the level of superstar. Same thing with Charlotte. I wouldn't elevate any of their players to superstar, but I think you've got to go with who has the hotter hand here. And I got a hard time not picking Charlotte here. I really do. I think it's a competitive series. I really don't think any of the other series matter because Cleveland's going to walk back to the finals. They're really not going to have too much trouble. I think maybe whoever wins this one, when they get to play Cleveland, maybe they win a game, maybe they win two, but I don't really see it being more than that. I'm going to go with Charlotte because they have been the hotter team. They've had the hotter finish to the season. I like Toronto, but I just don't think that they're ready yet to take that leap forward. I got Charlotte playing Cleveland in the Eastern Conference Finals, and of course Cleveland going on back to the NBA Finals where they will face off against the Warriors, but we'll get into the Western Conference in a minute, but it just really comes down to this. Can anyone in the East make it interesting against Cleveland? And I think that's a very easy question to answer. No. If you asked me 4 weeks ago, I would have said if you get the right team to play Cleveland, it's definitely a possibility but Cleveland finished the season a little bit stronger. They had periods where it wasn't great. They definitely had some causes of concern. They had a really bad loss to the Miami Heat where the effort just wasn't there. But I think this is a different force to be reckoned with. This is playoff time. This is a team last year where so many of those players had never tasted the playoffs before, but now they have tasted it, and now they're going to finally get to see what it's like when they've been there before. With the experience under their belt, I think it makes them even more dangerous. So, of course, I have Cleveland going up against and getting back to the finals. But now we shift to the Western Conference. And in the Western Conference, I think, again, it's the same thing. It takes 7 to beat Golden State, and that's something everyone is very well aware of. Houston, of course, getting the first opportunity to lose to the Warriors, and they will do it, and they're just, it's been a ugly year for Houston. They got into the playoffs, but they don't have a sense of identity. They don't play the game smart enough, and I just think Golden State easily gets past them and moves on, of course, to the play either the Clippers or the Trailblazers. And that is a very interesting matchup. Definitely one of the best opening round matchups in the NBA playoffs. But I like Portland here. The Clippers are great. Having Blake Griffin back changes the landscape of it. But Portland started the season out, and they had to learn how to play without LaMarcus Aldridge. They really were missing his veteran presence, his scoring ability, but they learned to play without him. It's a team led by guards. Damian Lillard has taken his game to another level. The only other player in the NBA this season, aside from Stephen Curry, with multiple 50-point games. I like Portland a lot here. I think Damian Lillard is the catalyst, and he leads his team to play the Warriors in the next round. Then you've got OKC and Dallas. I like Oklahoma City here. Russell Westbrook, of course, another storybook year for him. Kevin Durant's scoring ability. The problem with Oklahoma City is they can't finish. They're one of they struggle so much this year in the fourth quarter, closing out games. They played Golden State as well as anybody throughout the year. But where they lost to Golden State was in the fourth quarter. And in the NBA playoffs, it all comes down to how do you execute in the fourth quarter, and they just don't do it well enough. I have them getting past Dallas, but I don't have them getting much further than that. San Antonio against Memphis. Memphis, it's been a difficult year for them. Some injuries have prevented them from really being what we've seen from them in the playoffs the last few seasons, but I've got San Antonio over them. Golden State and Portland would be your next matchup. And then, of course, again, I've said it at the top of the show. I've got Golden State playing Cleveland. It takes 7 to beat Golden State. Golden State had a couple games where maybe they were in some trouble, but for the most part, they've shown you who they are. They're the most unselfish team in basketball. They have depth no one else has. I have them over Portland getting back to the Western Conference Finals. And then OKC and San Antonio is a very interesting matchup. If this was last season, I would have picked Oklahoma City. But this year, with the level of depth that they have, with the catalyst of their team being Kawhi Leonard and LaMarcus Aldridge, the centerpiece of their team is youth. And that's such a dangerous factor for this team. That is the veterans to back up that youth. With Tony Parker, Kawhi Leonard, and LaMarcus Aldridge, it's a dangerous team to play. They get back to the Western Conference Finals against the San Antonio Spurs. And then, of course, you've got Warriors, Spurs, the two best teams in the Western Conference. And although San Antonio has played them very tough this year, probably handed Golden State their toughest loss of the regular season, it takes 7 to beat the Warriors. It's a different style of basketball. It really comes down to speed and pacing, and the Spurs are going to do everything that they can to try to prevent the Warriors' pace, but the Warriors have a level of depth and just a level of shooting ability. San Antonio does not shoot as many threes as they did last season, and I think that's a major crux for them in their quest to get past Golden State. In the finals, we get a rematch of last season, Golden State against Cleveland. If Cleveland can come into this fully healthy, it will be a very interesting series because we know last year that's a different series if Kyrie Irving does not get hurt. It just is. It was a one-man show, and even in that one-man show, Cleveland had a chance. But I have Golden State winning it all again this year. I just think it's been a historic campaign. The 73 wins this season. It's just such a difficult formula to break up because they have unselfishness. They have a level of depth no one else has, and I just think they have a unique pace and scoring ability that we haven't seen in NBA history. Golden State wins the NBA title once again this season and starts what we will see as one of the best runs, I think, in basketball history because what they have there right now is unique. It's something that we haven't seen many times in NBA history. They're different from anything we've ever seen, and I think that they get it done. Cleveland against Golden State winning it all. It's going to be a great playoffs, and I can't wait for it to start tomorrow. Until then, Jersey Joe Archino here with the Sports Vault. You can follow me on Twitter at Joe Archino and on Instagram, Jersey_Joe_Archino, and I'll see everybody next time.